Hi, my name is Bob Hiss. Welcome to another episode of MRTV, which is the Milton Republican TV show here on Milton Cable Access. I'm the chair of the Milton Republican Town Committee here in town, and if you tune into this program on any regular basis, you know that our objective is to try to educate the citizens of Milton to what's going on politically within the town, the state, and potentially the federal level. So we try to bring in people who know more than I do, which is a pretty low bar, but we get experts from time to time. And we're fortunate to have today Representative Geoff Diehl, who's come in to visit us from the Massachusetts State House. And our topic today is to learn a little bit more about the gasoline tax. So Representative Diehl, thanks for coming in today.
Bob, thanks so much for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. So maybe we'll start with introductions. I'm sure not everyone knows who you are, but who are you and who do you represent, and a little background would be great.
Well, thanks, Bob. I'm Geoff Diehl, state representative from the 7th Plymouth District, which is actually Abington, Whitman, and East Bridgewater. And I live in the town of Whitman, which is the home of the Toll House cookie. I'm sure everybody is aware of that.
I'm sure you brought some for us all
and
today.
I wish in my car there was a ton, but unfortunately not right now.
Next time. Yeah.
I've got 2 daughters, so yeah, cookies are in short supply in my house.
No doubt.
But no, home of the Toll House cookie in Whitman. My wife grew up there and fortunate enough to marry into the district and ran for office in 2000, really started in 2009. And then the 2010 elections brought me and several colleagues in. I was reelected in 2012, and going into 2014 election shortly, probably be running again. But right now, focus on what's good for, we think are good for the people of the citizens of Massachusetts. And one of those things that you're, I think, having me come in to talk about is the gas tax and the repeal effort on that.
Right. By the way, what did you do before you got into politics? You weren't just fully formed and walked into the State House one day. So.
Sometimes you wonder. I first started in advertising after college in New York City. That's where I met my wife on a blind date, and we actually got engaged 4 months later, married a year after that. So she was an actress. She'd just done a Broadway show. So we went to LA to try to see if she could make it in the business. I actually got involved in television production, nothing quite like this, but we did some neat things out there. And after several years, we wanted to have children, decided to move back to her hometown of Whitman. And that is when I started working for a sign company. Television production like I did, live production, wasn't too big in this region. So went to work for a sign company in Brockton, ended up moving up to a sign company in New Bedford, the largest in New England. Did a lot of work on mergers, a lot of project management and sales for when banks would buy each other out, back in the good old days when the economy was really rolling. And was very fortunate to do well. My wife owns a small business as well, teaching dance, acting, voice, and modeling to kids, and a studio. And so I took some time to get involved with local town affairs. I got on their finance committee. And after a few years of state cuts and grumbling by members on the finance committee, I said, well, who keeps voting for this? I was apolitical really until 2008 or so. And somebody said, well, our local rep keeps voting to cut reimbursement for local aid, which really hurts. And in fact, they just cut the Quinn bill, which really hurts local towns as far as reimbursement. So I said, well, is anybody running against this guy? And nobody was. And I said, well, you think I should run against him? And they said, sure, just join your local Republican town committee and run. So I did. I read a few books on how to run, and I ran, and I won. And I've been really immersed in this ever since, trying to, again, figure out ways to help towns benefit from state government. And really, a lot of that means returning money back to the towns that I think they deserve to spend, because they know what really the needs are in their local communities. I don't think the state necessarily is the place to send all our funds and have them be the wise spender of our monies, because a lot of times it doesn't make it back. And the gas tax, exactly, I'm working on is one of those examples.
Well, let's transition to that then. So we all see the numbers on the pump when we pump up on a regular basis. Can you give us a little background on the gas tax? For example, I know it's around, I think it's like 44.5 cents.
Right, so 26 cents, the state's charging 26 cents a gallon, and the federal government's at 18.5 cents. Right, exactly.
So split, all right, got it.
Yeah, so that's the split. And the Massachusetts legislature hadn't raised the gas tax for 23 years. So the last time it was raised was 1990, and it's just gone up 3 cents, so that's in there. Now, what we're saying with this, okay, let me back up again. So there was a transportation bill that this was passed through back in July of 2013, okay? And what they did was they were trying to raise about $500 million in new revenue. The governor had proposed $1.9 billion in the largest ever proposed increase for a tax in Massachusetts. The legislature scaled it back to $500 million.
Per year they're trying to raise? Or
yes,
over many years?
Well, per year, and but based on 3 different things. One was cigarette tax. They added a new $1 to each pack of cigarettes. They passed the technology tax, or the tech tax is what we're calling it, basically putting a sales tax on the computer services.
Right.
Now, which is interesting because our state doesn't actually tax on labor. You know,
Right.
we're a high labor cost state already,
Right.
and so to tax on labor would make it even harder for businesses to do business here. So we don't tax on labor, but they decided that there was so much work in the technology field on this, they were going to add the sales tax to the labor.
That'll be our next show.
Right, right. Well, the good news is it got repealed. Well, a lot of pressure was put on by House Republicans.
Yes.
And we actually, and the technology sector actually came together very well and pushed back, and within 2 months it was actually repealed. So that was interesting. And it was about $161 million that they accounted for that would be in new revenue. And as a side note, the Senate President Terry Murray was asked what she would do to replace the $161 million. She said, there's actually enough revenue coming into the state already. We don't need to replace it. I'll touch on that later because that's a key aspect of what's going on here.
All right.
And then the third part of the tax was the 3-cent increase to the gas tax. But they didn't just increase the gas tax by 3 cents. They created a caveat that for the future, the gas tax will now go up automatically based on CPI, or the Consumer Price Index.
And that's the first time that's happened?
First time that in our state it's happened. It's happened in other states, and it's been repealed in other states because they realize it's a failed formula. And here's why. CPI, or inflation, the inflation rate, is based on several factors, some of which are the cost of gas itself,
Right.
the cost of food, which is actually dependent on gas because of the fact that it's transported, and the cost of goods. Other things that go higher because of gas costs. Okay, so when you take all these different elements that determine the rate of inflation, and now inflation goes up, our gas tax goes up. But as gas tax goes up, our inflation goes up. So
It'll
what you
chase
see
its
is,
tail, yeah,
it's
right,
exactly, it's
right.
a never-ending spiral upward.
Right.
And so that's why it's a formula that's been repealed in other states, but they're going to try it here in Massachusetts. They're actually trying to link CPI to the minimum wage as well. The Senate just passed that before Christmas break. It's now going to be in the House for debate shortly, and I plan on talking about it again. You just cannot drive prices up like that. You know, there are reasons why legislators are elected to vote, because we're supposed to look at things and determine when are the right times to implement either tax increases or tax decreases.
And then be held accountable
And
for
be
your
held
decisions, right?
accountable,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
And so this sort of puts the gas tax on an ever upward spiral, automatic and annual. So there is no vote by the legislature anymore.
Okay.
And one other thing I did want to touch on, which is the revenues coming into the state already. In fiscal year 13, we finished the year $627 million above benchmark. And what that means is every year the state determines what they anticipate revenues to come in: lottery, taxes, fees, everything is bundled together into a revenue consensus number. We beat that number last fiscal year by $627 million. A large amount. When you talk about a $35 billion budget, that's still a large chunk of money. That was
2%, right?
right.
Something.
Yeah, and unexpected revenue. Now, this year, benchmark was set again, factoring in that new high number. We're still exceeding, now at $486 million above benchmark. In fact, this month I haven't got the new number yet for March, but March, once that adds in, is going to put us well on track to be at least 600 million or more over. So you compound last year's increases to what's been added this year as a revenue beat, basically, and we are over $1 billion in where we were a year ago, or almost 2 years ago, really, in new revenues that the state didn't anticipate to get. So to actually have to have increased these taxes by the $500 million they were looking to, $500 million, sorry,
Yep.
they were looking to raise, really was never necessary to begin with.
Yeah, so to recap the math, the objective when we entered the swamp here was to raise $500 million a year.
Correct.
That was achieved and then scaled back with the repeal of the technology tax. But now because of not windfall, but the Massachusetts workers delivering more income tax and the businesses doing so, you achieved $600 million last year and you're on track for over $400
Right.
this year. So you did it last year and almost doing it this year without the tax.
Right, exactly.
Interesting.
And in
Okay.
fact, with those taxes passed, they actually add that into what this year's revenue consensus is. And again, we're beating that we're on track to beat what's last year's fiscal,
Right.
earnings. So it's really showing that at this point, the state's bringing in way more revenue than expected. Now, there are a lot of costs that are unanticipated. There's been problems with administration of DCF. We anticipate lawsuits, with going on.
What's DCF?
Department of Children and Families.
Okay.
There's been some situations going on with a lot of deaths, missing children.
Yep.
There's the problem with the Annie Dukin, the drug lab testing
Yeah.
facility. We anticipate $300 million roughly in new costs to relitigate some of these cases that are going to become
Hundreds of cases, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
But the point is, those still aren't totaling what we're bringing in for revenue. And so what we're trying to say is with the gas tax, not just the money issue, which we think the state's bringing enough of, but also going back to, and the failed formula, but going back to the fundamental question, which is, should any tax in Massachusetts or in the country be automatic and index upwards without a vote? The legislature votes every year to increase the state budget. They vote on the elements, they vote on all the spending. They should also vote on where they're going to get that revenue. It's part of representative democracy, is to say, if I'm going to be at a ribbon cutting, to celebrate the opening of a new facility, or I'm going to celebrate in a letter to my constituents that I increased funding for a certain agency, well, I should also be responsible for where I took, raise that money from. And if it's coming out of the taxpayer's pocket in the form of new gas taxes, and by the way, I should also expound on this a little bit, if you don't mind.
No, sure.
It's not just actually what people are going to be paying when they fill up their car. And by the way, a car's average tank is about 15 gallons. So when you combine state and federal taxes, they're actually going to be paying to the government about $7 out of every fill up. Every time you fill up your car, take about $7 and you're handing it to the state and federal government, which is supposed to be used for the maintenance of your roads and all the transportation upkeep.
So if our gas is out there at $3.55 or $3.60 right now, it would be $3.10 or $3.15 without those taxes.
The funny thing is, it doesn't matter what the price of the gas is. We have a fixed, cost.
Right.
And so again, every time you're filling up your car, you're paying about $7 to the government. That should be, we think, on top of the toll fees, on top of registration fees, on top of quite a few fees that go into road maintenance. They should be able to take care of that.
But that's about $4 to the state and $3 to the feds, according to that formula I think you gave.
Right.
Yeah, that's 7. Okay.
And what I think the ultimate thing is happening here is we're subsidizing the MBTA. I mean, the bigger picture here is the MBTA, the public transportation in Boston, tends to be very expensive. It's running very poorly. It's been managed very poorly for a long time. Their pension fund is actually running upside down. There's more people collecting than putting into it because they had very generous retirement benefits. You could be out at 20 years and get full benefits. So we're subsidizing millions of dollars into a pension fund, and that has to come from somewhere. So they're asking drivers across the state to subsidize that. And now let me get back to my original thing, which is what it's costing you, not just what goes into your gas tank, but also it's going to cost you in the goods you purchase. So like I mentioned, the fact that your food is transported by with gas, all the goods you buy. Okay, so those things are going to be going up. It's going to affect your household. But also, and I don't know if anybody remembers this, the governor promised when he ran in 2006 that he would reduce our property taxes. That never happened. And in fact, this gas tax goes the other way. Municipalities have to run police, fire, and school buses, police cars, fire trucks, school buses. And those all don't run on magic vapor.
But they get an exemption on the tax?
And there's no exemption.
They pay the taxes too?
I filed an amendment during the transportation bill to exempt municipalities from this new gas tax. That was stricken. Okay, so municipalities are now going to have to pay an ever-increasing rate, which, by the way, is variable. We don't even know what the annual increase of inflation will be. I mean, if you go back to the bad old days of the late 70s and you see double-digit inflation, just imagine that in your gas tax budget. So anyway, it's going to hit consumers, basically taxpayers, the most. Okay, and then on top of that, and I think Democrats will admit, this is a very regressive tax, meaning it affects lower income families more than it does higher income families.
On a percentage of income, right? Yeah.
Percentage of income, A, and B, the fact that their vehicles usually are less fuel efficient. They don't have the money to usually upgrade their cars to more fuel efficient cars.
Right, lower mileage, yeah.
It's lower, so they get lower mileage, and they tend to be more reliant on to from work, having to take kids to and from activities. So the lower income families just have less resources available to them, and it makes this tax hit them even more. So those are all the factors that go into what became a ballot initiative drive to get signatures so that we could repeal this effort.
Maybe I'll just summarize all the things. So I heard the concerns and you and others had with this were, one, that it was a spiraling formula based on a CPI index. Second, that CPI index was going to be based on the rising price of gas.
Right, exactly.
So it was going to be a tornado sucking the price up.
Right.
Third, that we've been able to achieve revenue increases in excess of plan that are as much or more than the gas tax was anticipated to go raise.
Exactly.
Fourth, that we're paying this for gasoline for our cars, and not all of it's going into the roads. A lot of it is going into the MBTA. And then lastly, the regressive nature of this, which is it's going to hit the people who can least afford it.
Exactly.
Hardest. Okay.
Exactly.
All right. Other than that, you're a big fan.
Other than that, how was the show, Mrs. Lincoln?
Right. Okay. So I'm curious. So I see what it means to the Milton voters, and by the way, there's no exemption for municipalities. So the 7th point is our police, our fire, the public works, the snow plows, all those things are going to hit us through our property tax rates as they all absorb that. So that's kind of what it means to the Milton voters, I guess. What do people think? Do you have any data on what the population across the state, what the reaction to this has been?
I do. So Mass Insight came out recently with a poll. In fact, so recently it was just last week. And what the poll was actually put out by one of your more liberal groups that was looking to get reaction on the ballot initiative. So we have a ballot initiative, just so you know.
Oh, okay.
This whole we haven't repealed the linkage to CPI. We're looking to repeal it at the November ballot. And so for 9 weeks, once we got the approval from the Attorney General on the language, we had a 9-week period where we collected signatures. There was hundreds of volunteers across the state that garnered about 120,000 raw signatures. We needed about 70,000. I round up 68,000, but we rounded to 70. And then we said we need to get to 100 so that when they cross off the names, a certain amount of names will at least make sure we clear the hurdle.
Right.
We got to 120,000 raw signatures, so that was really fantastic. It sent the message everywhere that the people across the state really got it and they don't want to have this happen. Now, Mass Insight did a poll, like I said last week, trying to gauge what the public reaction is currently to that ballot initiative. And they asked 5 questions on top of the, first of all, they asked should it be repealed. Then they asked 5 follow-up questions. On the question of should it be repealed, it was a 2-to-1. We had 63%, I don't remember what their number was, but there was some not sure, but we basically had a 2-to-1 approval that yes, we would like to repeal this.
For the entire thing, not just the CPI component.
No, just the CPI.
Just the CPI
Just the
component,
CPI
specifically
component.
that. Okay.
Yeah, and then the polling, they call it push polling when they try to ask questions that are geared towards shaping public opinion.
Sure.
So the 5
Leading
questions.
the witness. So to speak.
Exactly,
Yeah,
leading
right.
the witness.
Yeah.
And none of the questions that were asked we would have looked at and said, do you consider this taxation without representation? Do you consider this a failed formula? None of those questions were asked. They were all questions that were, do you know that this money funds transportation, road improvements? Would you approve of this if it was not, if it was just a flat-out tax increase each year instead of based on an index? They asked all these questions that basically were geared towards saying, what if it wasn't quite so bad, or you didn't really feel the effects of it? Trying to shape their opinion on it. Not one of them cleared 50% as far as getting somebody to say, yes, I would go the other way.
Even after all that.
Even after all those.
Helps babies and kittens, and it still didn't.
Yes,
didn't do it.
even if your car was to go 100 miles down into a pothole, would you? No.
Yeah,
They tried to do worst case disaster, and that didn't fly. So the good news is people seem to at least get the concept of what we're talking about. But again, there are organizations that are funding that poll, as well as are going to be doing a lot of media campaign against us. So actually, a show like this is a perfect opportunity for me to explain a little bit about why it's important on November, the November election when you vote for governor, to also repeal this gas tax indexing, not the gas tax itself, just the indexing.
Just the indexing. Okay. So after all those objections, the one you think is the most objectionable is that CPI-based indexing. So,
Right.
yeah.
We think that's a failed formula, and so. Of course, the people who are saying that repealing the indexing is a bad idea are the ones that are saying that this will now cut transportation funding. We're saying it's not cutting transportation funding. We're leaving the 3 cents in place. If the legislature needs that new money next year, just vote for an increase again. We vote on increases all the time. Do it for this. But another thing that's important for people to get is a historical perspective. So we mentioned the last time the gas tax was increased was 1990. 1 year later, AAA put out in one of their publications, a sort of a story called the $120 million Mirage, all right? And what they talked about was the fact that the $120 million new revenue that was generated by the 1990 gas tax increase, only $7.5 million was left to go for transportation. They had rated the remaining funds to go elsewhere in the general fund to pay for other things. Now, as early as 2000, or as recently as 2010, a local news station did an article, it was a television report on the underground storage tank. Now, 2.5 cents of our state tax on gas goes towards a fund for underground storage tanks, gas tanks that are underground that need remediation if there's a problem with leaking, sort of a disaster problem for the petroleum industry. 75 million of those funds 1 year was actually taken out and used elsewhere. Okay, so what we're trying to say is...
I'm sure they left an IOU, so
sure,
it'll be okay. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, but that's the thing, is they're trying to pretend that this money isn't ultimately diverted to other things. And the last thing I think people should really be aware of is when you're being told that this will stop road construction and funding, and you'll have more potholes and crumbling bridges. We have an accelerated bridge program that is very successful. People should Google it. Look up the state accelerated bridge program. They'll tell you about how successful they are in repairing bridges, and they've had $3 billion allocated on a bonding bill that has funded the accelerated bridge program. So we have a successful program already replacing our bridges. They just want to tell you that the bridges are falling apart.
That the gas tax is not funding.
It's not even funding.
Ah.
And then on top of that, the legislature increased, because local aid has been cut 40% since the governor took office. We have not gotten 40% of what we should have been getting over these years for local aid. What local aid funds is your town's discretion to spend on things like improving your local roads.
Mm-hmm.
What we do as a state legislature is allocate what's called Chapter 90 funds that go to your local DPW or highway department to do projects in your town. And so some of that money that comes in is, and the town raises, is used for road repair.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the legislature increased in last fiscal year from $200 million to $300 million Chapter 90 funds because it had been underfunded for so long. This was sort of a makeup. The governor decided to withhold the new $100 million because we didn't pass his $2 billion tax increase. He decided to hold back $100 million of those funds to go to your local town. So
even after you'd passed the law? Okay.
The House and Senate. So if you actually want to know why you've got potholes, it's because the governor didn't allocate $100 million that we made available for those construction needs. And so, the two major arguments they make really hold no water. And again, this gets really, the argument is back to what I think is the fundamental thing about, and it doesn't have to be the gas tax. It could be your income tax. It could be, property tax. They could try to link a lot of things to indexes, and in this case, CPI, inflation. So it becomes a variable that you would never know about for planning for the future, either personal incomes or businesses that are trying to figure out what their revenue and expenditures are. So again, we're saying, just look at the fundamental philosophy of having a tax, the only tax in Massachusetts that's going to go up automatically without a vote. It really doesn't seem to be what we're elected to do. I will say this too. Legislators are allocated a per diem if they choose to apply for it to drive to and from the State House for work.
Okay.
Not a lot of people are paid to go to work, but they have made it so they can be paid to go to work.
Yeah.
I don't take the per diem because I don't believe in that philosophy. But for those legislators who do take the per diem, it's very interesting that a lot of them voted for a gas tax increase they'll never feel.
Sure.
It's one of the things that I think people get frustrated with politics nowadays is that it's do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the exemption of the Obamacare, for example, down in D.C., I think very much frustrates people.
Yeah.
We're subject to the new Affordable Care Act, but the legislators aren't.
So the other interesting points out of this is, in addition to those first 6 or 7 points you went through, is someone could argue that, well, if you take away the gas tax, it hurts our bridges, but we have a separate $3 billion bond fund that's repairing the bridges.
Correct.
And even with the gas tax money that was being raised, and the legislature dedicating up to $300 million per year to all the cities and towns, almost $1 million per town, the governor pulled back a third of that.
Correct.
In a fit of pique or for make a point or something. So,
that's right.
So the money is there. Because I think as Republicans, a lot of us would kind of like the idea that a tax for a specific use, where the money goes in, we see what comes out, we kind of get that.
It's
right?
understandable.
So,
link to the usage, I get it. But on the fact of the matter is, and we did raise the gas tax 3 cents this year. It's not like we're not raising it. But really, it's our job to be discretionary as far as where we spend it and how much we raise,
right.
and oversight to make sure it's not wasted as well. And so
right.
a lot of those components really are, I think, getting to the point where, again, we had a team of people that decided that they wanted to work on repealing this. It seems to be a successful effort, and in November we'll find
right.
out.
So you got your ballot, 120,000 signatures. They're going to scratch some off. What's next with the ballot?
All right, so then there was a hearing. Once the ballot question passes the muster with the Secretary of State as far as number, it becomes a bill in the House, and then it goes to committee for hearing, in this case revenue. So I actually was there to testify at the revenue hearing. Most likely it's going to report out unfavorably, will be voted on in the chamber, will be stricken down, and what will have to happen is we're going to have to get 11,000 more signatures. Interestingly enough, those 11,000 can't be the same people that signed originally.
Even if you had more than you needed.
Yeah, so we're going to have to go back and actually mine anew 11,000 more people but we don't think that'll be a problem. But it will be another effort we have to go through.
As long as the 11,000 is subject to the CPI raise, you're going to have 3% more.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So once we get those 11,000, then we become technically the ballot question. And at that point, they'll determine whether it's a yes or a no. Yes on this or no on question 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it's going to be.
Okay.
And at that point, we'll be able to try to let people know, educate even more. And we're trying to educate now, but at that point we'll try to, then we'll have the bumper sticker that says yes on one or no on one or something like that. And really, that's where we're going to need a lot of help at that point. So we have a website we've set up where we're looking for people to help out, volunteering their time either to collect the additional signatures, either to donate some money, or to at least be somebody who would be willing to do what we're doing, which is spreading the information about there. So there's a website which is called tankthagastax.org. They can go to that. We also created a secondary website called stopautomatictaxincreases.com. So either tankthagastax.org or stopautomatictaxincreases.com.
Which we'll try to put up on the screen so that...
That'd be great.
Yeah.
And they can go to those sites, get more information about what I'm talking about here. Everything I've said is pretty much there in black and white. You can print out, and at the same time you can volunteer. You can share that, put it on share the link on Facebook, on Twitter, whatever you can do to get the message out, because clearly we're still going to need as many voters as possible come November to ensure that this thing passes. We don't want to have a recount situation.
Okay. So what's the deadline to get all this done so that you can end up on the ballot?
Well, that's actually still to be determined. We are going to try to push the legislature to vote on that bill as soon as possible so that we can get to the next phase, which is the collection, if they decide not to adopt, which I'm assuming they will, get to that collection. So we're looking at probably May as when we're anticipating that second wave of signature collection.
Yep.
And I think we'll have several weeks there. Once we certify those signatures, I think it'll basically be a summer push, a big summer push to try, which is a tough time because that's when people are not necessarily paying attention to politics. They're out vacationing or who knows what. So,
and probably paying more gas taxes than usual as they're driving around to the summer camps, et cetera.
But at least if we pass this thing, next year they won't have that big increase coming from the legislature.
Right. Okay. So if people want to learn more, they can go to, is it stopthagastax?
Yeah, tankthagastax.org and stopautomatictaxhikes.com. Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, if they want to learn more about what I'm doing, I've got a website, www.geoffdiehl.com. That's my personal website for my state representative work, and I have a link to those other websites as well as current information about what I'm doing about the gas tax. I put up pretty much weekly articles that are related to what I'm doing.
Okay.
So yeah.
Well, thanks for coming in.
Oh, thank you.
It's very nice having you join us and learning so much about it. Again, I'm Bob Hiss with the Milton Republican Town Committee. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to have you tune in soon again.